right, so we are continuing our renewal and revival sermon series, and as we do, we are in kind of the last leg of it. And arguably this sequence of messages is the most significant in the series. We're taking a look at the research done by the Barna group and what they have found as the way people who are outside the church and outside the faith view people and the faith that we live in within the church. This is going to be, I think, one of the most necessary but potentially the most uncomfortable pieces in this series. Because we're going to hear things that people think about us that we may not necessarily agree with or care for. There are going to be things we're going to hear about their perceptions that we're going to think are misconceptions of what an authentic faith looks like. And in the midst of this, what we have to do is turn the mirror on ourselves and ask the question of, do I do anything that feeds into their misconception about Christ and about the faith? And if I do, looking in the mirror, then I have to be humble enough to admit it, bold enough to confront it, and strong and faithful enough to change it. If I look in the mirror and I see that this is an area of my life that seems to be lived in a way that doesn't feed into that misconception, I'm still called to ask the question of, how can I do this with a greater breadth of scope in the world to counteract these stereotypes and these misconceptions that really are put out there by the way many people who claim to be Christians live out their faith. Now, neither one of those is the most comfortable place to be. And I can tell you, especially with the message today, I have found myself, when I look back at my life, feeding into this multiple times. And my hope is that through the years, God has worked to get these things straightened out in my life, and where I don't see them continuing to happen, that God will continue to work to get them even straighter than they already are. So, this is definitely, if you feel a twinge today, trust me, I've been there, felt it preparing the sermon. Today what we're going to look at is the perception that Christians and Christianity are shallow, that we are shallow. Now, one of the things that just was in a conversation before worship, and to explain why, if you've noticed, in the first service we do communion every first Sunday now. Okay? This is not necessarily saying anything about doing it quarterly, but I want you to hear from my perspective, this is something that is important for us to do as a community of faith on a regular basis, on a monthly basis. And outside of even my perception of its importance and significance to us as Christians, just on a very quick note, one of the things that many people who are not Christian feel is that worship in many ways has become shallow. And part of what they cite is that in many places they feel like worship has lost the sense of the sacred or the sense of the holy. And part of what sets our experience together apart as sacred and holy are the rituals that we observe, the sacraments that are part of our tradition that remind us that we are truly connecting to one that is greater than all and to one that sacrificed all on our behalf. And communion is a wonderful remembrance of that experience. And so we do it every month. Now, with that, I've got and we'll touch on this in a minute and a little bit further in the sermon, but in terms of why people see worship having become shallow, I am asking Carl to play a clip for us. I'm going to ask, yep, thank you, and we might have to turn the volume up a little bit depending on how it comes through.
Hunters. This is your first church. This is Creekside First Baptist.
Honestly, right up front, didn't love the name.
The Sunday morning experience was just a little too traditional.
Get a little louder.
Hey guys, how we doing?
Hey, good. How are you?
Doing good.
So I know you didn't love the traditional vibe of the last place, okay? But I think this church is really gonna do it for you.
Yeah?
It takes relevance to a whole new level. Behind me, you will see molded clay, jar art, tapestry, canvas, mosaic church.
I love it.
Beautiful.
Right? So you've heard of interdenominational,
Right.
and you've heard of non-denominational. Well, this church identifies as inter-non-denominational.
Wow, that's perfect for us. It really is.
But here's the kicker. A lot of celebrities go here.
What?
Jeff Foxworthy.
We love him.
Yep.
We really do.
Ben Higgins from ABC's The Bachelor.
Perfect.
Several Real Housewives.
Ooh.
And Usher even came here one time. Yeah.
Shut up.
Yeah, well, follow me. Come on.
Do it.
So refreshing. Honestly, that last church was just way too traditional. It was
Yeah.
too much.
It was like we left there feeling convicted, like, ugh, right?
Right. We're looking for more of a Tony Robbins type
Like
sermon.
inspiration, like a TED Talk with a Bible verse,
Yes. Oh, yes.
right?
It's perfect here.
We love it.
It really is.
We love it.
Awesome. Cool. Well, you guys know a lot of contemporary pastors speak out of the Message Translation Bible.
Right?
Or this pastor speaks out of a brand new translation. It's the Tumblr Bible.
Shut
We love Tumblr,
up. This
though.
is great.
Wow.
A lot of emojis, a lot of abbreviations.
Oh, I couldn't ask for. And how many seats in here?
Oh, it is 6,000 altogether.
Babe, 6,000. I gotta be in this worship band.
That's
Imagine me up on that jumbotron mid guitar solo.
Do you know how many Instagram likes you get? Oh my gosh. We find it hard to find a church right now because I grew up Catholic.
I grew up
and
Baptist, so
like we drink.
yeah, but in private. I mean, obviously you get it. Basically, in terms of like worship, I think we're looking for like a Jesus culture type feel.
Oh, I love them.
At Hillsong, obviously.
Oh,
Obviously-
leading you to the cross?
Hillsong's great, like a Bethel minus the spontaneous
Yeah.
stuff.
Yeah.
Just for me, I connect in worship more when the leader is attractive. Personally, I'm a Carrie Job guy.
Oh, okay. Well, she's married.
So is Christian Stanfield.
Wow.
So one of my personal favorite things about this church is the service times.
Okay.
There's an 8:30, a 10, a 1 o'clock, a 5:30, and even a 7 o'clock service.
Oh, there's nothing around like 2-ish?
Yeah, for us, for what we need, 2:15 is best.
Yes.
How many songs do they do during worship?
Usually 5.5, depending on where the Spirit leads.
Wow, babe,
that's
is that a
a
lot?
lot.
Well, if that's too much for you, they have a program here called the Worship Assist Program.
Okay.
So if you ever get tired during worship, an intern will come out and just hold your arms up. You just keep worshiping the King of Glory.
Just like that, I love it. You can still look super spiritual.
And my arms get so tired from yoga.
Same.
I actually like this church. I think we can make it work.
It was all right. I mean, it was good, but like I emailed the pastor and he didn't immediately respond. So we're taking these vessels elsewhere.
All right. You see the
You want
shallow
to
in
create a
that?
stunning website. I've already done it with Wix.
We'll
show you
get
how
to
it's
that
done.
in a second.
I mean,
So
I'm
here's
gonna
some
need to put these. I can't see
observations
without
that
them.
people outside
Just go to
of
Wix.com.
the church have about Christianity. They see Christians who have a really good talk game, who are very good at talking about the moral ethic of what people should and shouldn't do, how we should behave. They have a real good ability to talk about people's need for salvation, and many times it's kind of that guilt-centered message of, you know, believe this way or you're going to the hot place. But when they look at the content of the life of the person speaking those things so boldly, they see a life that is relatively inactive with any community of faith. Worship is something that is not part of their routine. They don't know their Bible terribly well, and many times their life is much more about self-service than service to others. And so what they put together is that while that sounds all well and good, but you have not shown us that you have any credibility. Your life has not shown that you're owning the things that you're saying, and so there's a disconnect, and that's seen many times as shallow. Similar but different, many times they see Christians who do go to church every Sunday and have a really good ability to talk the game. But then when they see them Monday through Saturday, they are no less and many times more greedy, rude, entitled, promiscuous, dishonest than the average person who has no faith perspective whatsoever to speak of. And when they see that, what that says to them is that what faith really is, it's just a Band-Aid that we slap on to try to soothe over all the bad stuff we did during the week. It's not really transformative. It's just something we say to make ourselves feel better. What they see in these instances is that in their minds, in their opinion, Christianity is something that can be compartmentalized. It can be stuck off to the side, and it doesn't have to come into contact with the other areas of our life. It's something we can say so we can look good and feel good, something we can do so we can get rid of some of the guilt that we feel, but it doesn't mean there's any real change or heartfelt expression that takes place. And that's perceived as shallow. And could you see why? Right? One of the stories, I heard this literally 3 times in 1 week from 3 completely different people, completely different locations, and this kind of speaks to this sensibility, which is one of the most irritating shifts for wait staff at restaurants is on Sundays after church. Because they say that when these people let out of church, they come in and they are some of the rudest, most arrogant, most entitled people that they meet, and that they're some of the most least gracious because they leave the worst tips. And sometimes, and please don't ever do this, sometimes what Christians will do is they'll leave a Jesus track, like the prayer of salvation, as the tip, and nothing else. And when pushed on it, usually, now I've been here. When I was a different denomination, this was one of the things that was pushed on us. And the rationale was, I gave them something so much more valuable than money. I gave them the keys to eternal life. And we forget that James says, it really doesn't do a whole lot if someone comes to you hungry, and if I say, the Lord bless you and feed you and be well, and send them away hungry. Because my words and my tract does not help that waitstaff feed their kids or keep their lights on. And so again, I'm just kind of reporting to you what's out there in the water. One of the other things they talk about and perceive is very much what we just saw in this clip about worship. That many times the way that we pitch worship to people as Christians comes across like that. It's about how many people are there, how much money comes in the collection plate, how awesome the music is, the production value of the worship services, that when you walk into the building, it feels like you're walking into a 5-star hotel, and when you walk into sanctuary, it feels like you're walking into a wonderful Broadway theater. And what a great impression that makes, that the coffee bar right outside the sanctuary serves the most delicious cappuccino. And you can take your coffee and your pastry into worship and eat while you praise. But what they see is that we're more concerned with style than substance. And what they see is that we're buying more into marketing than we are the transformation message of Jesus Christ. Because what they want to hear is how has my relationship impacted my life? Because that's the on-the-ground story that they can connect to. They want to hear about the love of the community that they'll experience when they walk in the doors. They see us as shallow, and this is one that really stepped on my toes, by the way we do our prayer lists. I see some confused puppy looks right now, like, how can that have anything to do with it? What they see is we do our prayer lists and we write down our lists of what we're asking for, and we pray for it, and then whenever the prayer request is granted, we check it off, right? But what that says to them is our only belief of an answered prayer is when I get a yes. And I'm not accepting anything else. And so me asking God for something and expecting that the only answer that is acceptable is a yes is less like a God, and it's more like a genie in a bottle. They listen to our answers when a prayer is not met, and we say things like, well, it's just not in God's timing yet. Or God hasn't prepared me to receive this yet. All right? Now, I want to take a break here for a second and say, is there anything wrong with telling people about your faith and talking about salvation? No. Is there anything wrong with going to church every Sunday and then going out to your normal work day and into your family and into your hobbies? No. Is there anything wrong with having a prayer list that helps you remember who to pray for and celebrating whenever something that you believe is necessary comes to pass? Absolutely not. Those are all things we should be doing. But what the world is seeing is those times when Christians do those things without a life or a faith life that connects to it, where it seems isolated, or it doesn't seem fleshed out in reality. And that sense of lack of reality comes through very much when we talk about prayers for healing. We ask for someone's healing, and they pass away, right? And one of the things that we often say is something to the effect of, well, God gave them the fullest, most complete healing by bringing them home to where there's no more suffering and no more pain and no more sickness and no more sorrow. Now, is that a unfaithful connection to that event? No, it's not. Okay? When we look at life as a continuum, that it's not just this life and then nothing. We look at life as that it's this continuum that happens after we die and we're welcomed into the arms of God in the kingdom of heaven. That's a very accurate way to look at it. However, to somebody that does not share our faith, is that the same thing as an answer to prayer that we were looking for? And it's not. Because when I pray for my friend to be healed, I'm not praying for him to die. I'm praying for him to be healed here, in this world, and now. And by couching it with a disingenuous message, it says to the person who doesn't share my faith, you're afraid of wrestling with the disconnect between what you wanted and what happened. What you asked God to do and what God didn't do. And they want something deeper. They want something, a more real answer than a cliche or a platitude. Sometimes we say things to ease someone's suffering like God needed another angel in heaven. Right? I have said that in the past. I don't say it anymore. I'm going to share with you why. But when we respond like that, first of all, it's not biblically sound. There's nothing scripturally that suggests that's even remotely true. But to somebody who doesn't believe, okay? Imagine you have no faith in God and you have no faith in Christ, and your spouse or your child or your parent has passed away, and I say, well, God just needed another angel in heaven. Here's what they think. So you mean to tell me that this God that is all-powerful and complete and needs absolutely nothing because God can create anything, you're telling me that God needed that 34-year-old woman more than those two young children needed a loving mother? You're telling me that God needed that 3-month-old child more than the parents needed to raise that child and pour their love and their life into that child, more than the world needed the gifts that rested in that child and would have blessed the world if that child had grown to adulthood. Is this making sense? Okay? What happens is when we do that to people that don't share our faith, what it looks like is we're trying to hide from reality. That we don't want to confront the struggles and the pain and the harshness of life because we'd rather just kind of stick a religious bumper sticker on it and keep walking. What they see is that the only reason many of us can do that is because we've been fortunate enough to get to the station in life that we have, and we have the support systems around us and many other things that help bolster us, and we mistake those things, we mistake our circumstances for God. And I guess working with the kids in Baltimore for as long as I did, one of the things that really comes up is when we say, boy, I feel so blessed by God and favored by God because I had two parents that loved me. And then you have the kid whose father is completely absent and whose mother is a crackhead. And they say, well, does that mean God doesn't love me? That God won't bless me, that God doesn't favor me because I grew up with none of that. And those moments are something that hit me really hard and said, man, I need to think about my understanding of God and the way I communicate it a little bit. Because when I say those things, it comes off to people who don't believe or have a very different circumstance. It can come off as very shallow. So the question becomes, how do we deal with this? What is the answer biblically of how we combat this problem of shallowness? Now, what's the opposite of shallow? Deep, right? So I say, go be deep, and that's the end of it, right? Well, that's not all that helpful. And I can say things that help us get to depth, which are very true, which are things like, make sure that we are connected through worship. Make sure that we're connected to God through study. Make sure we're connected to God through prayer. Make sure we're connected to God through fellowship. Make sure that we're living out the message of Christ through service. And that too is all well and good. But there's some things that undergird that make it much more likely. And the first one comes in this passage in Luke where the Pharisee and the tax collector come in. And it's a very familiar story to many of us. And the one comes in bragging about how awesome he is before God, saying, thank you, I'm not like this knucklehead over here. And the guy he's thinking of as a knucklehead just comes in and says, Lord, I am as imperfect as they come. Just have mercy on me. And the one that walks away justified before God is the knucklehead. The one who understands his imperfection, the one who understands that all that he is rests in God. And that is one of the foundation blocks of depth, and it's humility. Because humility says, I know that I don't know and I'm willing to seek. I know that I don't know, so I'm going to be careful about how I communicate the things that I believe, because as much and as deeply as I believe them, I have to remember that this other person may share those beliefs differently or may need to hear them in a way that I'm not accustomed to saying them. And so I need to seek God and the Holy Spirit and God's grace and all of those things to make up the difference between who I am and who God calls me to be. So that rather than looking at someone and saying, there, but for the grace of God go I, when I see somebody, no matter who it is, I say, thank goodness for the grace of God that God has brought me from where I was to where I am, and that grace will continue to bring me from where I am to where God calls me to be. And thank God that that same grace extends to you, and maybe we can walk this path together. Humility reminds us that we are all children of God and we are all seen as equal worth and equal value in God's eyes. And so like we saw a couple weeks ago, this sense of seeing others as Christ sees them comes from humility. And that humility is a foundation of depth, and it's also the foundation of relationships. Because if we want to communicate the depth of Christ comes from depth of relationship. That's how we move against this misconception people have of what Christianity is about. We look at this passage in Ephesians. I love this passage in Ephesians. And at its core, it really is saying, weave your faith through everything you do. The thing that really jumps out and speaks to that is when it says, speak to one another in psalms, sing to yourself hymns, and it's that sense that even in the most minor of things, even in the tune that I'm humming, even in the little ditty that I'm bouncing around, when we're talking to one another, remember that our faith is supposed to infuse every single piece of it. And when our faith does that, we see people with the compassion and the grace and the love and the mercy of Jesus Christ, and we see them as people. One of the things Sarah reminded me of yesterday as we were driving, something I don't even remember preaching this, but it applies today, is if you're a dentist, what do you notice about people first? Their teeth. If you're an architect or a contractor, I love walking into buildings with people that have that experience because they notice things that I don't have a clue about. Because that's what they're used to looking at. That's what they're used to seeing it. They see it everywhere. I bet you, okay, John, you do a great job with our kitchen and the safe serve and everything like that. When you walk into a kitchen in another building, do things jump out at you? Right? It's like, whoa, that's really bad. Wow, that's really awesome. And so the same thing holds true of us. If we weave our faith, and our faith is woven through every moment, every instance of our lives, if that's the core of who we are, then rather than seeing people as a target or as an enemy or even as a friend, what we see people as is an extension of Jesus Christ. We see Christ in them, and we understand what Jesus meant when he said, whatever you've done to the least of these, you've done to me, because I am there in the midst of all that. And again, that's the foundation of depth of relationship. It is the key to depth of faith, because faith is not something up here, and it's not just something in here, it's something that's lived out there. People want to see that our faith is something that isn't just present in the happy, lucky, Pollyanna, everything's coming up roses moments. They want to see that our faith is something that weathers every storm of life and does it by looking it in the eye and not turning to the side and saying, I'm going to ignore part of you because I don't want to admit that this complicates my sense of the world, or this causes me to ask questions of God that someone told me I'm not supposed to ask. But we tackle it head on, knowing that God is big enough for our questions, knowing that God is big enough for our wondering, and knowing that God is loving enough to walk with us through it. That's what people want to see. That's what they need, because they're hurting and they're broken too. And they want to know, like they hear that God is the God of the mountaintops, and that's great, but they need to know that God is the God of the valleys too. It's depth of relationship with God, with reality, and with one another. Now we're going to connect something between the sermon and communion here right now. Because here's the thing. If we're going to spread the gospel of Jesus Christ to people we don't yet know, what do we have to do? We got to meet them. Yeah, we got to interact with them. And one of the places where depth of relationship is formed is in common experiences. It's the opportunity to engage people in something that we can talk about and can bond us together, and through that Christ can shine. So now many of you know we did something a couple of weeks ago, and we asked the congregation what they're dreaming about for what's coming down the road when this new building gets done. These are the opportunities for us to do things that help us connect with new people that we don't know. These are opportunities for us to find common ground between us and people that don't know Jesus, so we can build relationships and so Christ can be seen through it. Because I'm telling you right now, trying to mass produce the gospel message doesn't work. It comes in singular relationships between people. And that is the gospel from beginning to end if we look at how Jesus did it. So I'm going to ask you to do something this morning. And whenever we do anything that is offering ourselves to God, right? Sacrament summed up is this. It's an outward expression of an inward experience. Okay, the inward experience that we have is the salvation and the grace of God. The outward action is that we remember it by taking the bread and the cup. That's what sacrament is. And what we're going to ask you to do today is we're going to ask you to take your inward experience of God and ask yourself, how can I act this out in ministry? So what we've done, and Susan was absolutely instrumental in making this happen. We had more ideas you could shake a stick at come flying out at us at those meetings. So we've condensed them into categories. And you'll see things like Pioneer Club, which is like a co-ed scouting thing for Christians. Alpha is it says it's an experience that explores the basics of Christian faith for people that don't believe. Mom's Day Out would be offering childcare to mothers who need to go out and do things but don't have the time because they're constantly taking care of the kids. You have things like game nights, something that may need a little hosting community classes. That kind of jumps in with hospitality, that sense of, do you have any connections to people who have life skills that they teach in a community that might need a place to do it? Or are you able to be friendly? And when someone comes in, say, welcome, nice to see you. We have bathrooms indoors, not just the ones Roy uses outdoors. And you can certainly jot down something else, but what we're asking you to do, and the papers are at the ends of your pews. You can start doing it now if you want, just listen. On the left, it says, I like the idea. In the middle, it says, want to participate. That means, I would like to actually be part of that program. So I would like to learn how to paint. I would like to play basketball. I would like to underwater basket weave. Want to help is different. Want to help is, I would be willing to help lead this program. I would be willing to jump in and take some kind of a role in making it happen. And then on the right says, how much time can you give to help? Because that's important. All of us are busy. All of us have things to do. So what time would you perceive that you could give to participating or leading one of these things or something else? And then now, I know sometimes people are hesitant to do this. Put your name at the top. Because if you put want to help and we don't know who you are, that's a problem. So we're going to ask you to just take a couple minutes and just run down. It shouldn't take long. And then as you come to receive communion, as you come to the sacrament of communion, we're asking you to bring this with you as a sense of your inward experiencing, projecting into an outward action, and drop it in the basket that'll be up here.